through the third-year anniversary stories of the U.S.-led invasion, and the tone of a whole lot of this coverage has been negative, has been downbeat, has been pessimistic. In part, that's because a lot of the news out of Iraq has not been good, but I think we may be reaching kind of a tipping point here that we saw in Vietnam, where the press coverage seems to tilt against this war effort.
So you've seen a change in recent weeks, is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Compared to, say, a year ago or 2 years ago, I think it's not unconnected to the public opinion polls. I think journalists are finding it easier to ask aggressive questions of President Bush, to frame the stories more negatively in terms of the American presence there, because they know a majority of the country now questions or disagrees with that war effort. I do think, however, that a lot of journalists make an effort to talk to ordinary Iraqis and to report on signs of progress. But let's face it, in our business, the car bombing, the suicide attack, the attack on a police station, those tend to be top of the newscast, top of the front page kinds of stories. The other reconstruction efforts are less dramatic and tend to get pushed back.
It's the same in basically covering any story. You go here in Washington, D.C., if there's a major incident, let's say a shooting incident, whatever, we don't report, you know what, 99.99% of the kids went to school today, businesses were open, things were flourishing. But if there's a horrible shooting incident, we're going to report that in local media as well.
There certainly is a bad news bias in that sense. We cover plane crashes. We don't cover safe plane landings. But the additional complicating factor here, Wolf, as I know you know, is that it's very dangerous for journalists in Baghdad. We've seen that with some of the deaths and injuries of journalists there, most recently ABC's Bob Woodruff. And so journalists are frustrated that they can't tell more of the story of ordinary Iraqis and what they think about the U.S. presence there, because they have to curtail their travels or travel with security details. So when you add that to the natural tendency to play up violence, the dramatic pictures that television, of course, loves, I do think we are seeing more negative coverage now, and obviously it's in the political self-interest of George Bush and Dick Cheney to highlight that, because they're trying to make the case that things are not as bad as they seem in Iraq, and the media are a handy target.
And very briefly, is there any sign of a backlash against the mainstream media because of our coverage of what's happening in Iraq?
Yes, among conservatives, among military family members and others, a lot of people, as we saw with that woman from West Virginia, blaming us for the situation there.
Howard Kurtz is the host of CNN's Reliable Sources, which airs Sunday mornings here on CNN, 10 a.m. Eastern, also writes for the Washington Post. Thanks, Howie.
Thanks
very much. Let's go to New York. Jack Cafferty standing by with the Cafferty File. Hi, Jack.
You know, I just have a question. I mean, part of the coverage, they don't like the coverage, maybe because we were sold a different ending to this story 3 years ago. We were told that we'd be embraced as conquering heroes, the flower petals strewn in the soldiers' paths, a unity government would be formed, everything would be rosy 3 years after the fact, the troops would be home. Well, it's not turning out that way, and if somebody came into New York City and blew up St. Patrick's Cathedral, and in the resulting days they were finding 50 and 60 dead bodies a day on the streets in New York, you suppose the news media would cover it? You're damn right they would. This is nonsense. It's the media's fault, and the news isn't good in Iraq. The news isn't good in Iraq. There's violence in Iraq. People are found dead every day in the streets of Baghdad. This didn't turn out the way the politicians told us it would. And it's our fault? I beg to differ. That's not what I'm going to talk about, though, today. It's the hottest thing in Washington since the Dubai ports deal. It's called immigration reform, another subject near and dear to my heart. The debate about what to do with the flood of illegal immigrants, 12 million of them in this country, is a complex one. The president wants a guest worker program. That'll make big business happy. The public wants the borders closed, the present laws enforced, and the illegals deported. But politicians who support getting tough on illegals could pay a big price at the polls, because there are a lot of Latino voters. And don't kid yourself, like everything else in this country, politics will eventually decide who wins. In the meantime, the country's in this mess because we have virtually ignored the laws that are already on the books against illegal immigration, and that adds the requisite hypocrisy to the hand-wringing in Washington about what to do now.